Welcome students to our Form 4 CLE. In our previous lesson, we introduced ourselves to human sexuality. We looked at what human sexuality is all about. We also looked at traditional African understanding of human sexuality. We also looked at Christian teaching on human sexuality. And today, we want to look at male and female relationships in traditional African practice. But before we begin the lesson, we would wish you, my viewer, my students, to register with us. Register with us, let us know that we are together in this course. Use this number, SMS 21450, to register yourself as my student. Also, we appreciate your feedback. Positive, negative, we appreciate all of them. Let us know what you feel about us and about what we are doing. After the lesson, you may want to ask a question. You may want to be given some tips. Could be even on exam. Why don't you also send an SMS on number 21126. But remember to specify the class. Do you want tips on CLE Form 1, CLE Form 2, or CLE 4? In this case, like CLE 4, tips 21126. And now, to class, male and female relationships. Male and female relationships in traditional African practice. An African practice will be found in an African society. I always like my students understanding what is this society that we call an African society. This is a society which is free, very free from external influence. May it be modern, may it be Western, may it be from where, it must be free from external influence. Therefore, these are practices that will be African-born, African-bred. And therefore, we want to look at how female and male relate in this society, which is purely African. When it comes to relationship, of course, we shall begin from birth. When children are born and they are young, naturally, they don't even know whether they are boys or girls. And we find that they relate freely. In fact, when a child is even naked, she doesn't realize that she's naked. She will even walk naked because she doesn't know that she's either a boy or a girl. And therefore, at a young age, we shall say they relate freely. They relate freely. In fact, they will even share a bed and they will not realize that they are either boys or girls. However, even when they are young, in an African society, they received some education on sexuality. And as we discuss Africans, I want you to think about your society. I don't know how much education you have been given on sexuality by your parents, by your relatives, or even by your teachers, because it is important. So in an African society, this education began at a young age, that is during childhood. And we find that during childhood, girls in an African society, before even we continue, I want to rectify something. An African society is not a past tense idea. Some people normally imagine that African societies were, but they are still there today. So it can be a past idea or a present idea. And therefore, when it comes to answering a question on this topic, always answer the question the way it has been asked. Is it a past tense idea or a present idea? Therefore, as we are discussing here, we are discussing a present idea. So in a present African society, how do males and females relate? So in childhood, we find that girls always relate with their mothers. they will relate with their mothers. They will keep together with their mothers. They want to identify with their mothers. Meaning, even when they are young, they look at a few things and they feel, the girls feel they have a resemblance with their mothers more than their fathers. And therefore, even at this age, we find that they are taught some roles. They are taught some, of course not all, but they will be taught some roles on how to behave like a woman, although remember they are still young. So they will be taught some roles, stroke responsibilities. It is at this particular time that in an African setup, you'll find a young girl going with the mother to fetch water, going with the mother to draw water, being in the kitchen to ensure food is cooked, but of course doing lighter duties, lighter roles. But remember, we have said they identified with their mothers, with their aunts, and with their grandmothers, particularly grandmothers. Now, for the boys, they identify with their fathers. They identify with their fathers. So, as much, although when they are free, they relate with girls freely. Because remember, we have said they don't really know whether they are men or women. They relate freely. But when it is time for work, girls will be there with their mothers, while boys will be there with their fathers. They will identify with their fathers. And therefore, as at a very young age, boys will learn some roles, some responsibilities from their fathers. It is at this time you'll find that a very young boy goes to take care of the animals with the father, goes to clear bushes with the father, at least to see what the father is doing, and could be to help here and there. Remember, we are discussing an African society. So the father's role at this age and the father's role at this age is purely to demonstrate practical skills. So their roles at this stage is actually to demonstrate practical skills. So not really to be assisted by the young child, but simply to demonstrate, so that as the child is growing up, he or she knows what she requires to learn in the future. Because she by this particular time, she or he can really know that he can identify with either the mother or mother, because they know they are either a girl or a boy. Now, as we have seen, girls will continue with their mothers, and of course with their female relatives, while the boys will continue with their fathers, and of course the male relatives. And without forgetting that they also have their grandparents. The girls will also associate with their grandmothers, when the boys will associate with their grandfathers. Life will change as they grow up and they reach puberty. Of course, biologically, the bodies begin now to show who is actually the man and who is actually the woman. And at this particular time now, the girls will realize that they are actually women. And you realize that at this particular time, they begin separating, they begin treating each other differently. And therefore, it is at this time that in an African society, when the boys and the girls will meet, there will be supervision. The elderly will supervise their meeting, especially during feasts and ceremonies. During feasts and ceremonies. Why? Because even the parents have realized that their children have grown, they have reached puberty, and unless they are accompanied, unless they are supervised, they can easily engage in sexual intercourse. So to ensure that these young people do not do that, then they are supervised. Their activities are normally supervised by the elders or the older people. So in simple words, to ensure that they don't misbehave. So the supervision is to ensure that they actually don't do anything that is not accepted or acceptable in the society. So these controls are put in place to ensure that they stay apart when necessary, and they do not do things that can embarrass the society, especially sexual intercourse. Why? Sex, as we discussed, is only preserved for marriage. And since these young boys and girls are not yet ready for marriage, then they are supervised so that they are not misread by their bodies. Now, since the physical differences can be seen between boys and girls, we are told time comes for initiation. And remember, in most African societies, initiation is carried out for both boys and girls. And what happens at this particular time? So during initiation, we are told there is what we call vigorous sex education is given to the initiates. So once they are initiated, they are given a lot of education on sexuality so that they understand themselves, they also know their roles and why they should behave on how they should behave. What is taught to the girls during this time? Remember, the girls are taught by their grandmothers and their mothers, and of course, those who assist them during the initiation period. So the girls are actually taught how to be responsible mothers. They are taught how to be, before they become mothers, they have to become wives, responsible wives, responsible mothers, how to treat their husbands, and also how to treat their in-laws, as well as how, of course, to ensure that their families are provided for. So in simple words, it is at this stage of initiation that the girls are actually prepared for parenthood. They are told why they are girls, and the reason why they have been initiated is because they are being prepared for marriage, and when they get married, they are actually taught on what the society expects of them. For the boys, they are also taught on how to be responsible husbands. They are taught on how to be responsible husbands, responsible fathers, how to behave towards their wives, and also the in-laws. However, on top of these teachings, for the boys, they are also taught on how to carry on the leadership in their families. So they are actually taught that they are the ones to protect their families, to lead the families, and offer protection to their families during the adult life. After initiation, this is during initiation. What will happen after initiation? Because they have been taught on what is expected of them during initiation. Something I must comment on is that during this initiation period, it takes place, or it's carried out to girls and boys separately, and they are isolated from each other during this period. The teaching, the education will take place to both of them when they are separated. So let us see what happens after initiation. After initiation. And there is something I could have said about initiation. Initiation is carried out in different communities in different ways. But what we must appreciate is that there is a stage where there is marking of one moving from childhood to adulthood. However, it is done. There are those societies which will do it differently. There are those which will circumcise. There are those which will remove the teeth. But all is initiation. There is marking. There is moving. There is passing over from one stage to another. So after initiation, what happens? Boys and girls are given the opportunity now to interact. Both boys and girls are given opportunity to interact, are given opportunity to interact. How do they interact? Of course, they interact during feasts and during dances. There are those what we call local dances, so they can meet especially during traditional dances, and therefore they are allowed to interact. Why? because it is at this particular period when now they are supposed to pick those they think they should marry, to become free to one another. So they interact, but it must be noted that in this interaction, there are rules to be followed. We call them rules and regulations. There are rules and regulations that have been set, and they must be followed. Meaning, although they are relating, they're interacting freely, but there are still a few things that they are not allowed to do. So rules, regulations, at times they can also be called taboos. So there are things that if they do, of course, they will be termed as illegal, and they are accompanied by some punishment. Now, however, at this time, serious courtship is allowed. Serious courtship. They can court. They can begin preparing to they can introduce to each other and begin becoming more than friends to each other. So courtship can begin from there. So at this time, they can even be allowed to have what we call erotic games. They can be allowed to carry out some games, both boys and girls together. However, they must be careful not to engage in sex. As much as they are playing games, remember we have talked of rules and regulations and taboos, they must ensure that they don't engage in sex, because at this particular stage, it's still illegal. We shall find out later why they was very serious, how they actually wanted these boys and girls not to involve in sex among them. And it could be why even the young people of today should be discouraged from the same. Now, after marriage, how are they supposed to relate? So, after marriage, of course, now they related as husband and wife. So the girl was supposed to act the wife when the man was supposed to act the husband. And at this particular time, of course, they had a right to enjoy, or they had a right and an obligation to, of course, have sex, or to enjoy sex because they were married, produce children, so long as they took care of the children that they gave birth to. Therefore, procreation was only meant to take place in marriage. And if procreation was only meant to take place in marriage, then sex was only allowed in marriage, and therefore the essence for marriage. At old age, how are they supposed to relate? Or how are they supposed to relate? At old age, men and women continued to relate as husbands and wife. And of course now, when they are old, it is the duty of the elderly now to take over the duty that was taken by the elderly when they were also young. So it is them now to educate their grandchildren. They are also supposed to educate their grandchildren on sex matters. All members of the community, of course, have a responsibility to ensure that both male and female relate to one another as expected by the traditions and the customs of their society. Failure to uphold what is expected of them, of course, attracted fines, punishments, and punishment could be as severe as even being excommunicated from the community. And that brings us to the end of the relationship between male and female in a traditional setup or in traditional practice. We have looked at it in stages: at childhood, young age, puberty, at initiation, at marriage, and even in elderly stage. Now, remember we have said, if you want to ask any question, ask for any tips, please do as a message. Just write a message, CRE 4, if you want Form 4, or if you're in Form 4, CRE 4 tips, send to 21126. I love my students. I really want to know whether you are one of my students. Let me know you by name. Why don't you just send an SMS to 21450. Feedback is also appreciated, both positive and negative. When we meet next, we shall look at male and female relationship in a Christian context. Until next time, have a nice time.